Success in Edexcel GCSE English Language is so much about practice. Let's look back at a past paper 2. We're going to look at the mark scheme and my model responses, and I'm going to give you a detailed commentary on what is required to get that top grade. So stay tuned. Yes, Schofield on Shakespeare.
In this video, I will explore Edexcel GCSE English Language Paper 2 from June 2018. You can download this paper directly from the Edexcel website. This is very easy to do. Simply type Edexcel GCSE English Language past papers into Google, then follow the 4 steps shown on screen. Click on June 2018 and then choose the question paper. However, I will also show the text and questions within this video at 5-second intervals. I will split the text into 4 parts so that the font isn't too small to read. I'll show you the mark scheme and my answers after all questions and texts have been shown, but you will get the most out of this if you've actually attempted to answer them yourself. So, get reading.
How did you get on? Produce some delicious responses.
So here's the answer for question 1. You need 2 places where Milton made public appearances. Choose from Clubs, Leland, Greenville, Nelson Street, Memphis. Time to mark your response. Press pause now. For question 2, you have 1 mark for a valid example from lines 9 to 12 and 1 mark for some brief analysis of language. Here's what I wrote. Here are some of the ideas in the mark scheme. For this question, your analysis needs to be precise, but it can certainly be brief. No more than 1 sentence is needed for the second mark. Time to mark your own. Press pause. For question 3, the language and structure question, you can see the guidance to examiners stressing the importance of a balance of both language and structural points. Here are some suggested points about the language. Press pause to read these through and compare to your answer. Are any of these points more detailed and perceptive than what you wrote? Now for the suggested points about structure. Read these through particularly carefully. And remember that with structure, you're looking at things such as changes in foci, sequencing, repetition, and sentence types.
Time for my model answer to question 3.
Tony Russell suggests that little Milton Campbell was a groundbreaking musician, emitting extraordinary energy. For instance, his early records are described as a heady brew of shameless imitation and lawless bravado. The noun brew is more typically used to reference the process of making homemade beer, whilst the adjective heady suggests that his music produces wonderful feelings of energy and perhaps slight intoxication. It is not that his music is particularly original which interests. Russell makes reference to shameless imitation or undisguised copying from others. It is the overall combination of copying and out-of-control carefree energy which interests and engages the reader, in spite of the clear lack of initial originality. Structurally, Russell emphasises Little Milton's importance by comparing him to 3 great musicians, B.B. King, Ike Turner and Elvis Presley. The majority of readers, even younger readers, would have heard of at least one of these names, Presley, and probably 2, and thus we are interested to learn how Little Milton should be regarded in relation to these famous successful stars from history. What is particularly interesting is that the sentence is structured to delay the revelation of Little Milton's wider importance until the end. We learn that he became a spokesman through soul music for the entire African American community. This suggests that Little Milton became someone far more significant than a mere musician, but someone who could speak for his contemporaries, who would almost certainly have been subjected to racial prejudice. Indeed, Russell suggests that Little Milton escaped the confines of blues or rock and roll to do this. This now confirms Little Milton as someone much greater than a musician from a certain genre. He was able to break free in order to wield influence more widely than might be expected. Whilst Little Milton's earlier records were clearly inspired by others, it is interesting to learn that Milton's guitar playing was decidedly original, all spiky lines and muddy tone. The adverb decidedly confirms the surprisingly unique sound of Milton's guitar playing and music. This cannot be mistaken for another musician. In addition, the adjectives spiky and muddy are atypical when it comes to referencing music. Spiky could suggest a nervous energy and unusually large leaps between notes, whilst muddy may reference a more muffled tone, which could create a gloomier or more sensual atmosphere. Either way, these descriptions interest the reader as they confirm that Little Milton has merit as a musician and stands out amongst his peers. Structurally, the passage follows the typical structure of an obituary, in which the writer goes through different stages of the deceased's life and picks out important and relevant details. The second and third paragraphs reference Little Milton's teenage musical successes, revealing that he made his first public appearances in the clubs of Leland and nearby Greenville's notorious Nelson Street. Non-American readers are unlikely to understand the context of these references, although the adjective notorious adds interest, with readers speculating whether this may refer to a particularly successful hotspot for musicians or possibly a famously violent area. However, it is clear and impressive that Little Milton had a great deal of success from a very young age. Before he was 20, Milton had made several records for Sam Phillips's Sun label. The initial subordinate clause puts the main clause in context and suggests precocious talent and ability. The vast majority of teenagers have only achieved educational success, rather than the recording recognition achieved by Little Milton. This impresses and interests the reader, particularly because the writer subsequently goes on to emphasize the longevity of his career. He recorded more than a dozen albums from 1984 onwards. I do think your opening sentence is pretty important, and it is essential to say something meaningful. In this particular opening, I show that I have grasped a key idea from the text which is relevant to the question. The mark scheme calls for a discriminating selection of references or quotations. Remember that a quotation is essentially copying, so you need to make sure that these quotations really do back up the precise point you want to make, and that the words are interesting enough to be analysed minutely. There is so much to explore within Heedy Brew of shameless imitation and lawless bravado, hence the 3 sentences and 80 words of analysis which follow. It is more difficult to write about structure, and of course the mark scheme requires you to get a decent balance between structure and language. Signpost your analysis of structure with a whopping great structurally comma at the beginning of a paragraph. When exploring quotations, it is important to regularly come back to the question, which here is analysing how the writer uses language and structure to interest and engage the reader. Occasional present participles such as interesting and engaging can hence be helpful in ensuring you remain sharply focused. For this question, it can be a good idea to re-quote or re-reference individual words from your quotation and spend a single sentence just analysing this words. Time now to make a judgment call on your response, which you will be better equipped to do having read my response and looked at the suggested points in the mark scheme. To get in the top band, you need to have detailed insight into both language and structure. Give yourself a mark out of 50 now. The second part of the mark scheme will appear in 5 seconds' time. For question 4, we shift to text 2 and a very easy question. There are 5 possibilities which can be either quotations or using your own words. Press pause to mark and to hang your head in shame if you didn't hit one of the suggested points. For question 5, the quotation has been given for you. Your job is simply to write 1 sentence of language analysis and cut down the quotation to hone in on particularly interesting word or phrase. I write, the present participle creasing suggests that Bessie is smiling widely in a very attractive way. Here are the suggestions on the mark scheme. Pretty simple stuff here to get the mark. Press pause. Now for the trickier question 6, which requires a weighing up of a statement, which requires delicious evaluation. You need to make a critical judgment which will not consist of just blind acquiescence. Before I show you my model response, here's a flavour of some suggested initial points from the mark scheme. Read them through.
Here's my model answer for question 6.
This text appears to be from a longer account about blues' music and focuses on a single performance given by a jazz singer, Bessie Smith. Admiration is evident through the writer's spotlight on a magical individual concert. Early on within the extract, rich, hyperbolic descriptions of Bessie Smith's voice during her concerts imply unqualified, unrestrained enthusiasm on the part of the writer. He gushingly refers to such a ringing vibration in that voice of hers, which he later labels a flamethrower licking out across the room. The phrase "that voice of hers" suggests that there is something unique and individual about Bessie's voice, whilst the metaphor flamethrower suggests that it is so powerful that it figuratively heats up and transfixes the entire audience. Such language unquestionably smacks of enthusiastic admiration for an extraordinary live performer. Indeed, it is clear that the writer doesn't just admire Bessie's voice, but her physical presence as well. He describes her as real woman, all woman, voluptuous, buxom and massive. The repetition of woman and the three adjectives highlighting her impressive form seem to gush not just with admiration but awe. This is a performer who can captivate and overwhelm her audience, as confirmed by the image of her vitality flowing out like a cloud, stuffing the air till the walls bulged. This hyperbolic imagery suggests the pervasiveness of Bessie's energy. Anyone present in the room cannot help but be infused and injected by her singing physical presence and personality. Such hyperbolic imagery powerfully shows the writer's admiration for Bessie Smith, although perhaps there may be the implication that she needed to be seen live, in the flesh, in order to be appreciated fully. Such an idea is confirmed by the suggestion that her performances evoked a variety of different feelings. She swayed with a grace that made you want to laugh and cry all at once. In other words, those attending her concert would be moved on multiple emotional levels. Whereas a pop singer might be expected to have a more superficial effect, Bessie's jazz singing would arouse complex, simultaneous feelings of joy and sadness. What is perhaps most striking is that it appears such exuberant talent is entirely innate. The writer suggests that she never practiced her scales in any conservatory of music, wrestling with arpeggios. Unlike other, presumably wealthier musicians, she didn't hone her skills following hours of technical tuition, but was born with silver strings for vocal cords, which led to her becoming a very great artist. The use of the noun artist confirms the writer's deep admiration for Bessie Smith. She isn't just a great musician, but an artist, someone worthy to be considered on an equal footing with painters, sculptors, and other creative geniuses. The passionate language is persistent within text too. Towards the end, we learn that Bessie lived every song she sang. She was just telling you how it happened to her. The verb lived is italicized to emphasize the writer's passionate admiration for Bessie, as someone who invested every ounce of her being and personality into her musical performances. Overall, it is undeniable that the writer is successful in showing deep-rooted admiration for Bessie Smith as an extraordinary performer who ultimately died due to racial prejudice. A short introductory paragraph of 2 sentences is helpful for this question. In what context may the writer be expressing admiration, and what difference may the text type make to this? Ensure that you begin to address the statement within this opening paragraph. Remember the difference between question 3 and question 6. In question 3, you need to analyse the language in detail. In question 6, you need to evaluate and so explore quotations in order to come to a conclusion about whether indeed the writer can be said to be successful in showing his admiration for Bessie Smith. Whether you decide he or she is successful doesn't really matter, provided you back up your points with an argument which stems from a close understanding of the text. Try not to be one-dimensional when evaluating. Reference other aspects, other sections of the text so that your overall evaluation can be more detailed and insightful. With this question, you need to avoid blind agreements. At times, you need to slightly disagree or at least clarify your points, as I do here when I suggest that the writer's admiration may stem primarily from an appreciation of Bessie Smith's live performances. Hopefully, you are now in a position to give yourself marks out of 15 for evaluation, focus on question, and use of supporting quotations. Press pause to do this. For question 7a, the mark scheme makes the rather obvious point that students need to draw on both texts in order to access marks. There are plenty of suggested points. Press pause to read these through.
Time for my model answer for question 7A.
Both musicians are inspired to some extent by the blues. In text 1, we learn that Little Milton retained the affection of more blues-inclined listeners. Similarly, in text 2, the writer refers admiringly to the walloping blues that came throbbing out of Bessie's throat. Both musicians are powerful and original in their own ways. In text 1, Milton's guitar playing is described as decidedly original. In a similar way, Bessie's singing electrifies with a grace that made you want to laugh and cry all at once. Both musicians are popular, successful. In text 1, Little Milton's popularity is implied in the huge number of records produced, including several records for Sam Phillips's Sun label before he was 20, and 7 releases on Bobbin. Similarly, in text 2, Bessie's popularity is implied in the fact that so many people want to attend her concert that there was a traffic jam out in front of that cafe. You should now be in a position to give yourself a mark out of 6. Press pause to do this. Now for 7B. Once again, the examiner stresses the importance of balance. What kind of comparisons did you come up with about the differing ideas and perspectives in the two texts? Have a read through the suggested responses from the mark scheme. Press pause.
Time for my model answer to question 7B.
When comparing these two texts, it is important to reference the fact that text 1 is an obituary, whereas text 2 is taken from an account of blues' music. As an obituary, text 1 needs to remain relatively formal and factual in tone, whereas there is greater scope for exuberant imagery and expanding upon the singer's admirable qualities in text 2. Text 1 provides a great deal of information about Milton's life, including where he was brought up, born in Inverness, Mississippi, the record labels he signed for, Sam Phillips's Sun label, Chess label, Stax Records, and successes within his career as a whole. We're Gonna Make It went to the top of the R&B chart in the spring of 1965. Thus, the reader is able to gain a concise, broad insight into Milton's career. There is no such overview within text 2, which instead goes into enormous detail about the effect Bessie Smith had on an audience during a live concert. The language is far more informal, as seen in the reference to walloping blues that came throbbing out of Bessie's throat. Such hyperbole would be inappropriate for an obituary, but do highlight the extraordinary power and energy emitted by the singer whilst performing. The format of text 2 allows the writer to go into far more detail dissecting Bessie Smith's unique musical style. We learn that the melody meant nothing to her. She made up her own melody to fit the poetry of her story. In addition, she would make the vowels come out just the right length, dropping the consonants that might trip up her story. This helps the reader understand what it was that made Bessie Smith such a mesmerising performer, and it is particularly helpful for those who have never heard her sing. In contrast, there are no such minute details about vowels and consonants in text 1, although there is a single sentence giving insight into Milton's guitar playing, which was decidedly original, all spiky lines and muddy tone. Instead, the numerous biographical details suggest the longevity of Milton's career and gravitas. He became a spokesman for the entire African American community. Although Betty is described as an artist right down to her fingertips, the intensive focus on her extraordinary voice and presence means that there are no specific details about her longevity or impact upon her wider community beyond her music. Text 2 uses a great deal of imagery in order to emphasise Bessie's power and the magical effect she had on audiences. She had a high voltage magnet for a personality and would send those golden notes of hers on their sunshiny way. The first image implies that those in her proximity would be rapidly and instantly pulled towards her energy, irrespective of their own personal intentions. Meanwhile, the second image confirms the joy emitted by her singing. Her voice would quiver with figurative rays of light which would infuse listeners with happiness and sadness too, as we learn in a different sentence. In contrast, text 2 is far more restrained, although it dutifully references successes across Milton's career, included being established as one of the leading figures in soul blues. Nonetheless, the absence of imagery and the relentless relaying of biographical details contributes to the reader being less interested and enthused by Milton's life in comparison to Bessie's. As with question 6, a short introduction is helpful in putting the two texts in context. Of course, the text type will influence the way ideas and perspectives can be presented, and a short comparison about this early on will help you access the higher marks. The mark scheme calls for balanced references across the two texts. Don't get carried away by spending too long on one text. After you've made a point on one, switch to the other, ensuring that you compare between the two. It is not enough just to compare mid-paragraph. I would recommend returning to compare at the end of each main paragraph as well. The mark scheme requires a varied and comprehensive comparison. And of course, your quotation choices need to be discriminating, not unnecessarily long, and shed detailed insight into the writer's ideas and perspectives and how they differ between the two texts. Time to mark. Press pause to do so. The second part of the mark scheme will appear shortly. Now for section B. In this video, I will show you my model response for question 8, although of course the mark scheme is the same for both questions. The mark scheme is split into two sections. 24 marks is for tone, sounding right, and a carefully planned, ideally clever structure. 16 marks is essentially for spag, spelling, punctuation and grammar. You're looking to use a wide variety of sentence structures for effect and a wide range of accurate punctuation, including, of course, that much maligned semicolon. Here's my model answer. How music affects people. New research from the University of Lisbon has revealed that just 4 sessions of music therapy can improve the symptoms of those suffering from mental illnesses, including depression. Kevin Winstanley, 20, was diagnosed with combined anxiety and depressive disorder after being made redundant from his job at Wilko's in Swindon. I just couldn't cope, he explained. That store had been my life. From filling up the pick and mix to chatting to customers, from checking the sell-by dates of grocery items to socialising with colleagues, I loved it all. His mother, Karen Davidson, 39, revealed that her son changed from a fun-loving life and soul of the party to a monosyllabic introvert. After Wilko's closed down, Kevin didn't know what to do with himself. Initially, he seemed to quite enjoy having the extra time, which he would typically spend down the pub. However, after a month, he began to run out of money and confidence. Then the low mood started. Kevin's GP suggested that he might like to take part in a musical therapy trial taking place in nearby Cirencester. Participants had to commit to at least 4 one-hour sessions in which they would verbalise positive statements about themselves whilst listening to euphoric dance music on personal headphones. According to Dr. Pedro Gouveia, the benefits of this therapy are extensive and long-lasting. Participants report that their mood levels remained improved more than 4 hours after the session, and there is also anecdotal evidence of reduced dependency on medication such as Prozac. Jim Henderson, 27, is another enthusiast after enrolling in a different trial scheme in Southampton. He experienced symptoms of depression after splitting up with his long-term partner and being denied access to his son. He feels strongly that GPs should be able to prescribe music therapy as a matter of course, particularly after experiencing unpleasant side effects from Rivotril, a powerful drug used to treat anxiety disorders. Arguably, the majority of us without diagnosed conditions such as anxiety and depression use music in a similar way on a daily basis. We all experience the joy of a familiar chord or refrain from one of our favourite songs as it begins to play on the radio. We all sit back and smile at the end of a busy day, finally free to choose and savour the perfect playlist on YouTube. And we all enjoy reliving our youths as we squeeze back into those faded indie t-shirts and head out to bop and jive to our favourite cover bands at the local live music venue. Noel Gallagher, the singer and songwriter of the popular band Oasis, once memorably declared, "With music, you can forget all the crap, if only for 3 minutes." Those participants in music therapy sessions are likely to share these sentiments, along with millions of music-loving fans across the world. Note how the first sentence of a newspaper article summarizes what the article is about in a formal way. New research from the University of Lisbon has revealed that just 4 sessions of music therapy can improve the symptoms of those suffering from mental illnesses, including depression. Newspaper articles include full names of people, sometimes their ages, places, and shortest quotations in which speech marks have been used accurately. Newspaper articles include experts, here it's Dr. Pedro Gouveia, and technical language if appropriate. But this isn't just a newspaper article, it's also GCSE English Language, in which to some extent you need to show off how well you can write. Notice my use of anaphora here, which allows me to develop my ideas further and use more interesting vocabulary such as savour, squeeze and jive. Now compare to your response and scrutinise this mark scheme in more detail. Give yourself a mark out of 24 and a second mark out of 16. The second part of the mark scheme will appear in 5 seconds' time.
Oh, hello there. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production exploring Edexcel Paper 2. I hope it's been useful. Many thanks for watching.